The market was noisy, filled with voices of traders and buyers. The smell of smoke and dust covered the air. Daniel walked alone through the crowd, his old boots sinking in the dirt. He had no reason to be here except that walking among strangers made him feel less empty inside. His life had been quiet and lonely for many years, and sometimes the noise of others helped him forget. He was about to leave when he heard a rough voice shouting, "3 credits. Only 3 for this one." The words cut through the market like a strange bell. People laughed. Some turned away. Others whispered cruel jokes. Daniel stopped, his eyes narrowing. 3 credits. That was the price of a cheap drink. What could be sold for so little? He pushed forward through the bodies until he reached a small platform. There, standing on a broken crate, was a figure too thin and too still. A sack covered the head, dirty and tied with a rough cord. The body was small, weak, and trembling. The crowd mocked. Worthless. Not even worth feeding. And who would want that? Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen many sad things in the colonies, but this was different. The figure stood alone, like a forgotten object, silent, waiting for an end. His heart beat faster. Something inside him said he could not just walk away. The trader holding the rope sneered. 3 credits. Take her or leave her. She eats too much for me. He pulled the rope harshly and the small figure stumbled. A soft whimper escaped from under the sack. It was not the cry of an animal. It was the sound of a child. Daniel felt his throat tighten. His hand moved to his pocket without thinking. He had a few credits left, barely enough for his own food. He knew it was foolish. He knew people would laugh at him. But he placed the coins on the table anyway. The trader snorted, grabbed the money, and dropped the rope in Daniel's hand. "She's yours now, don't bring her back." The crowd laughed louder. Some whispered that Daniel had lost his mind. Others shook their heads and moved on. But Daniel did not hear them. His eyes were fixed on the small figure with the sack on her head. She stood shaking, as if waiting for another blow. He bent down slowly, his voice low and careful. "It's all right, you're coming with me." She did not answer. She did not even move. Daniel realized she was too afraid. He wrapped his coat around her thin body and guided her away from the platform. Each step felt heavy, the stares of the crowd burning into his back. Yet he kept walking, one hand holding the rope gently, not as a chain, but as a promise that he would not let her fall. When they reached the edge of the market, the noise grew, softer. The wind carried dust across the empty road. Daniel stopped under the shade of an old wall. His hands trembled as he reached for the cord around the sack. He hesitated, afraid of what he might see. With one careful pull, he loosened the knot. The sack slid away and the girl beneath was revealed. Her skin was pale with faint glowing patterns across her cheeks. Her hair was tangled, silver strands falling over bruises. Her eyes opened slowly, wide and filled with fear. They were not human eyes. They shone with a faint blue light. Daniel felt his heart stop for a moment. She was alien, young, and broken. Her lips trembled as she tried to speak, but no sound came out. She only pressed her back against the wall as if ready for punishment. Daniel crouched down to her level, his voice softer than he thought he could make it. "No one is going to hurt you now." The girl blinked, confused. Her hands clutched the sack as if it was a shield. Daniel noticed scars around her wrists, thin and cruel. He looked away for a moment, swallowing his anger. Whoever had done this, to her saw her as less than nothing, but he could not. Not when those glowing eyes looked at him with such quiet terror. He opened his bag and pulled out a small piece of bread. It was dry and old, but it was all he had. He held it out to her. At first she did not move, then slowly her hand reached forward, trembling. She took the bread and pressed it to her lips. A single tear slid down her bruised cheek as she ate. Daniel watched in silence. His loneliness, the empty years of his life, all seemed to point to this moment. He had bought her for 3 credits. But deep inside, he knew it was not a purchase. It was something else, something he did not yet understand. The girl whispered something then, so soft that Daniel almost missed it. One word, broken, but clear. Lyra. Her name, She was not an object, not a slave, not worthless. She was Lyra. Daniel nodded, his voice steady. I'm Daniel, and you're safe with me now. The market noise was far behind them, but the sound of that single word stayed in his mind. It was the start of something he could not yet name. The road back to Daniel's home was long and quiet. The colony's edge was far from the market, where only broken houses and rusted machines stood. Lyra walked beside him, her steps small and hesitant. The rope still dangled from her wrist, but Daniel had not tied it. He carried it loose, refusing to pull her like the trader did. Every few steps she glanced around, her glowing eyes darting to shadows as if she expected someone to jump out and hurt her. Daniel noticed the way her shoulders stiffened whenever voices echoed in the distance. She was ready to run at any moment, yet too weak to even stand without shaking. When they reached his small house, Daniel paused. The door was old, the roof patched with metal scraps. Inside, it was no palace, but it was his. He opened the door slowly, letting Lyra step in first. She hesitated, clutching the sack she still carried in her hands, as though it was the only thing protecting her. The room smelled of old wood and smoke. A small fire pit sat in the center, surrounded by rough chairs and a worn bed against the wall. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Daniel realized how empty it felt. But when Lyra stepped inside, even her fragile presence made it seem less hollow. He closed the door gently, then knelt to her level. You can sit. You're safe here, he said softly. Lyra didn't move. Her glowing eyes flicked from him to the fire pit, then back to the door. She pressed herself against the corner, refusing to sit. Daniel sighed. He did not blame her. Trust could not be forced. He placed the bread bag on the table and lit the fire. The flames flickered, warming the room. Lyra flinched at the sudden light, but after a moment, she stretched, her hands slightly toward it. Daniel saw her fingers, thin, scarred, trembling. His heart tightened again. Whoever had treated her like this had taken away her sense of safety. Hungry? He asked. She nodded once, barely. Daniel broke another piece of bread and handed it to her. She snatched it quickly, almost like an animal, and ate in silence, crumbs falling down her chin. Daniel pretended not to notice. He let her eat. After a while, she stopped. Her lips parted, and for the first time her voice broke the silence. Why? She whispered. The sound was fragile, like glass ready to break. Daniel tilted his head. Why what? Why buy me? She asked. Her voice carried confusion more than anger. Her eyes shone with fear and suspicion. She had lived her whole life expecting cruelty. She could not understand kindness. Daniel leaned back, rubbing his hands together slowly. He did not know how to answer. He hadn't planned it, hadn't thought. It had been pure instinct. You looked alone, he finally said. His words were clumsy, but true. And I know what it's like to be alone. Lyra lowered her eyes. The fire reflected in her tears. She clutched the sack tighter. Daniel wondered why she held on to it so strongly. Perhaps it was the only thing that still belonged to her. The night grew colder, and Daniel gave her his blanket. She refused at first, shaking her head quickly. He placed it gently around her shoulders anyway. For a moment she froze, then slowly pulled it tighter. Her small frame disappeared into the cloth. Daniel pretended not to watch, giving her space. As she leaned against the wall, Daniel finally saw what the sack had hidden, not just her face, but the glowing patterns across her neck and arms. They pulsed faintly like soft blue rivers under her skin. Each line curved in strange shapes, delicate and beautiful. It was unlike anything he had ever seen. Lyra caught his gaze and quickly turned away, hiding her arms under the blanket. Shame flickered across her face. Daniel frowned. You don't need to hide, he said gently, but she shook her head. They hurt me. Because of this, she whispered, touching the glowing marks. Said I was cursed. Daniel's jaw tightened, his hands clenched into fists. He wanted to storm back to the market, to shout at those who had laughed, to strike the traitor who had treated her as trash. But he stayed quiet. He knew anger would not help her. Only patience could. "You're not cursed," Daniel said firmly, his voice steady. "You're alive. That means you're strong." Lyra blinked at him, as if she had never heard those words before. Her lips trembled. She whispered again, "Strong?" As if testing the meaning, Daniel nodded. "Yes, strong." She looked down, silent, but the faintest spark lit in her eyes. For the first time, Daniel thought he saw something else there, not just fear, but the smallest seed of hope. Later, when the fire grew dim, Lyra lay curled under the blanket, clutching the sack like a pillow. Daniel sat on the other side of the room, watching her breathe slowly. He felt the weight of the day pressing on him, but also something new. The loneliness that had followed him for years felt lighter. He had no idea what tomorrow would bring, or how the colony would react when they found out he had brought an alien girl home. But he knew one thing clearly. He would not abandon her. Not now. Not ever. As the flames flickered low, Daniel whispered quietly to himself, "You're safe now, Lyra. I'll make sure of it." She stirred slightly, eyes half open. Her lips moved, and she whispered back, almost too soft to hear, "Thank you." Daniel closed his eyes. His heart, once heavy with silence, carried a new weight, not of sorrow, but of promise. Daniel's house was not much. It was made of patched metal walls and wood that creaked when the wind blew. The roof leaked whenever rain came, and the floor was rough and cold. Yet it was the only shelter he had. And now, it was hers too. Lyra stayed close to the corner, wrapped in the blanket Daniel had given her. She moved like a shadow, silent, careful, never taking more than a few steps from the wall. Her glowing eyes followed Daniel as he worked around the room, chopping wood, fixing the fire, or boiling water. She never asked for anything, never complained, but her silence was heavier than words. At night, Daniel often woke to soft sounds. It was not the wind or the creak of the roof. It was her, crying, quietly into the sack she used as a pillow. He never spoke when he heard it. He just sat up, staring at the dark ceiling, wondering what pain filled her dreams. One morning, Daniel left to fetch water from the well outside. The cold air bit against his skin. When he returned, he found Lyra crouched near the fire pit. She had taken a broken pot and was trying to stir the coals. Her small hands shook, her movements clumsy, but she was trying. Daniel set the bucket down and watched. She looked up quickly, her eyes wide like she had been caught stealing. Help," she whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. "You don't have to," he said, "but thank you." Her lips twitched into the faintest curve, not quite a smile, but close. From that day, Lyra began to do small things. She swept dust with an old rag, carried wood, or cleaned the table with careful movements. It was not much, but for Daniel it was everything. It meant she was beginning to see this place as hers too. Still, fear lingered in her. She jumped whenever footsteps passed. Outside, she froze when the door creaked open. Once, when Daniel dropped a pot by accident, the loud clang made her collapse to the floor, covering her head with her arms. Daniel rushed to her side, his heart breaking. "It's all right. It's just a pot," he whispered. But she trembled for a long time before believing him. One evening, as the cold wind whistled through the cracks in the wall, Daniel noticed something strange. Lyra sat near the fire, the blanket slipping from her shoulders. Her back was turned, and for the first time, Daniel saw faint glowing lines spreading. From her neck down to her back, they curved like rivers of light, but they were broken by scars deep and cruel. Daniel froze. His chest burned with anger. He had seen scars before, but never ones that mixed with something so strange, so beautiful. The marks seemed to fight each other, her natural glowing patterns and the cuts made by cruel hands. Lyra pulled the blanket quickly back over her shoulders, realizing he had seen. Her face turned pale. "Who did that to you?" Daniel asked softly. Lyra shook her head, refusing to answer. Her eyes filled with tears. She pressed her lips tight. Daniel did not push. He knew forcing her would only make her hide deeper. Instead, He placed another log on the fire and spoke, gently. "Those scars don't make you weak. They show you survived." Lyra blinked at him. Her hands tightened around the blanket. A tear rolled down her cheek. She turned her face away, but Daniel had seen it. He knew the weight she carried, and though she did not say a word, he promised himself he would carry some of it for her. The nights grew colder as the days passed. Daniel gave her his bed while he slept on the floor. She argued at first, shaking her head, whispering, "No." But he smiled and said, "I sleep better here." She looked at him strangely, as if she had never seen such a choice before. Slowly, she accepted, curling up under the blanket with the sack still clutched in her arms. Sometimes Daniel found her staring into the fire late at night, her glowing eyes reflecting the flames. Once he asked quietly, "What are you thinking about?" She hesitated, then whispered, "Home." Her voice cracked on the word. Daniel felt a sharp ache in his chest. He wanted to ask more, but her silence afterward told him not to. Instead, he reached for the kettle and poured warm water into a cup. "Here," he said. "It's not much, but it helps." She took the cup with both hands, sipping slowly. Her eyes softened. She whispered, "Warm," as if it was the first good thing she had tasted in years. Daniel leaned back, watching her. The house was still cold, the wind still sharp, but for the first time the room did not feel empty. There was life inside it, fragile, but real. One night, when the fire burned low, Daniel whispered across the room, "You're safe here, Lyra. No one will take you again." He did not know if she believed him, but she turned her head, her glowing eyes meeting his. For a long moment she said nothing. Then very softly she whispered, "Safe," repeating his word back to him. Daniel closed his eyes, relief washing over him. She was beginning to trust, slowly, like a flower opening after a storm. He knew it would take time, maybe years, but he also knew he would never turn away from her. The house was still cold, but it was no longer empty. Inside its broken walls, two lonely souls had found the beginning of something new. The days in Daniel's house began to take on a rhythm. Each morning he would fetch water, chop wood, and prepare a small meal. Each evening the fire would burn low while Lyra sat quietly, her eyes following the flames. Slowly, almost without noticing, she began to move differently, not just as a frightened guest, but as someone who belonged. She no longer hid in the corner all the time. Instead, she walked around the small room, touching the shelves, the worn chairs, the wooden table. She even placed the sack she once clutched on a hook by the wall, though she still glanced at it often like it was a piece of her past she could not throw away. One morning Daniel found her humming softly, a sound so faint he almost thought it was the wind. She stopped the moment she realized he was watching, her face flushing, but Daniel only smiled. "That's a nice sound," he said gently. She looked away quickly, but he noticed the small spark of light in her eyes. Lyra began helping more. She swept the floor without being asked, fetched wood for the fire, and once even tried cooking. The soup came out too salty, but Daniel ate every spoonful with a smile. She watched him carefully, waiting for anger or insult. When none came, her lips curved into the smallest smile he had ever seen from her. It lasted only a second, but it warmed him like sunlight. Trust, Daniel realized, was not something to be demanded. It was earned one small act at a time. And every day, Lyra gave him a little more. But outside the house, the world was not so gentle. Whispers spread through the colony. People had seen Daniel take the alien girl from the market. Some said he was a fool. Others said he was dangerous for bringing her home. Rumors always traveled fast, and soon there was knocking at his door. It was late evening when 3 men arrived. Their voices were rough, their clothes worn with dust and grease. Daniel opened the door, his hand resting on the frame. "What do you want?" he asked. The tallest man leaned forward, sneering. "We heard you got yourself a new pet." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's not a pet," he said, his voice low but firm. The man smirked. Don't play noble. We saw her. The sack-headed. Alien from the market. She belongs back where she came from. Give her to us and we won't make trouble. Behind him, the other two laughed, their eyes cold and greedy. Daniel felt his fists clench, but before he could speak, a small sound came from behind him. Lyra had stepped into view, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Her glowing eyes wide with fear. The men's laughter grew louder. Look at that, she even shines in the dark. Must be worth more than 3 credits after all. One of them jeered. Lyra shrank back. Daniel stepped forward, blocking their view. His voice was sharp now. She's not going anywhere with you, leave. The tallest man's smirk faded, replaced with a sneer. Careful, Daniel, you think. You can hide her forever. People don't forget. The colony doesn't want her kind here. His hand twitched near his belt where a knife hung. Daniel's heart pounded. He knew these men. They were bullies, scavengers who thrived on fear. If he gave in now, Lyra would be lost. She would think his kindness was just another trick, so he stood taller, his voice steady. If you come back here again, I'll make sure you regret it. The men glared, but finally stepped back, muttering curses as they walked away into the night. The door closed with a heavy thud. Daniel leaned against it, breathing hard. His hands still shook with the urge to fight, but he pushed the feeling down. He turned slowly, and there was Lyra, standing frozen by the fire. Her eyes were wide, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered in disbelief, "You kept me." The words sounded broken, like they carried years of pain behind them. Daniel walked closer, kneeling so his eyes met hers. "Of course I did. You're safe here. No one will take you away." Lyra's lips trembled. Her hands shook as she pressed them against her chest. "No one ever kept me before," she said. Her voice cracked and her body shuddered with silent sobs. Daniel did not touch her at first. He waited. Then, when she leaned forward just a little, he placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. For a long time, she cried quietly, the firelight glowing on her face. When she finally lifted her eyes, they were different, not only full of fear, but of something else. Something new. That night, after the fire burned down and the house grew quiet, Lyra sat near Daniel and whispered, "Family." The word was soft, uncertain, but filled with meaning. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He nodded slowly. "Yes, family." He said it was only one word, but to Lyra it was everything. It meant trust, safety, and a bond that no chain could ever break. For Daniel, it meant the end of loneliness. For the first time in years, his house felt alive, not just with warmth, but with hope. The night after the men came, Daniel could not sleep. He lay on the floor, staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the fire dancing above him. Every sound outside made him tense, the crunch of gravel, the whisper of wind, the echo of distant boots. His mind replayed the words of the scavengers. She belongs back where she came from. He turned his head and looked toward the bed. Lyra was curled up under the blanket, her glowing eyes closed, her chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She looked peaceful, but Daniel knew the peace was fragile. He knew she had heard every word spoken at the door. The next morning, the air outside was sharp and cold. Daniel stepped out to fetch water. His thoughts weighed heavy. If the men returned, if more people from the colony came, what then? He had little strength, no allies, and no weapons but his old axe. He wondered if he had made a mistake bringing Lyra here, but the thought burned in his chest because deep down, he knew he could never send her away. When he returned, Lyra was sitting at the table, the blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She looked at him with wide eyes, her lips pressed tightly together. Finally, she whispered, "You could have given me back." Her voice shook. "You could have let them take me." Daniel set the water bucket down. He crouched to her level. His voice was steady but firm. "I will never give you back, Lyra. You are not theirs. You are not for sale anymore. You are mine, not as property, but as family." Lyra blinked, her glowing eyes filled with tears. She shook her head slightly as if she could not believe him. "Family," she whispered again. testing the word like it was fragile glass. Daniel nodded. Family. For a long moment she sat in silence, clutching the blanket tighter. Then slowly her hand reached out and touched his wrist. It was the first time she had done that. Daniel felt the weight of the moment, as if a wall between them had begun to crumble. Days passed, but the colonies. Whispers grew louder. Some people avoided Daniel in the market. Others spat insults when they saw him. Still, he held his head high, buying supplies quickly and walking home with his jaw tight. Lyra noticed the stares too. Her steps grew smaller whenever she left the house with him, and once she begged, "Maybe I should hide again." Daniel shook his head. "No, you will not hide. You have hidden enough." His voice carried a strength he had not felt in years. He was not only speaking for her, he was speaking for himself too. One evening as they sat by the fire, Lyra spoke again, her voice low. "Why are you alone, Daniel?" He looked at her. Surprised by the question, she lowered her eyes. "No family, no friends, no wife." Daniel stared at the flames. His chest tightened. Memories returned. A wife long gone. A child he never got to hold. Loneliness that had grown like a shadow. Inside him. "I lost them," he said simply. His voice was rough. "And after that, I had nothing left." Lyra was silent. Her glowing eyes shone in the firelight. Then she whispered, "Now you have me." The words struck deep. Daniel's throat tightened. He nodded slowly. "Yes, now I have you." That night something changed between them. It was no longer just kindness or pity. It was something stronger, a bond neither could name yet, but the danger had not passed. A week later the same men returned. This time they did not knock. They tried to force the door open. Daniel grabbed his axe, his body tense. He pushed the door open himself and stood in the frame. Blocking them, the tallest man snarled, "We warned you, Daniel, that girl does not belong here. Hand her over and maybe we let you be." Daniel's voice was sharp. "She stays with me." The man laughed bitterly. "You'd fight us for a worthless alien." Daniel's jaw tightened. His eyes burned. "She's not worthless. She is my family. If you want to take her, you'll have to go through me." Behind him, Lyra gasped. She stood by the fire, her hands trembling, but her glowing eyes locked on Daniel. She had never heard anyone speak of her that way. Not once in her life. The men hesitated. They had not expected such defiance. One of them spat on the ground. "You'll regret this," he growled. They turned and left, disappearing into the night. Daniel closed the door, breathing hard. He turned back and saw Lyra, her face wet with tears. Her voice cracked as she whispered, Why do you fight?" "For me?" Daniel lowered his axe and knelt before her. "Because you are worth fighting for," he said softly. "Because you are not alone anymore. You are my choice. My family." Lyra covered her face with her hands, crying quietly. But her tears were not only of fear. They carried something else, something new and fragile. For the first time she began to believe she could belong. That night she did not sleep in the corner. She moved closer to Daniel, sitting near him by the fire. And when the flames flickered, low, she whispered again, "Family." Stronger this time, more certain. Daniel looked at her and nodded. "Family," he said. And in that moment, the choice was sealed. Not by blood, not by law, but by something far stronger. The weeks turned into months, and the bond between Daniel and Lyra grew stronger. The small house that once felt like a cage of silence now carried voices, footsteps, and even laughter. Lyra no longer moved like a shadow. She walked with more ease, her glowing eyes lifting to meet his, though shyness still lingered. Outside, the whispers of the colony never stopped. Some said Daniel had lost his mind. Others called him cursed. There were those who mocked him loudly when he passed through the market. "Man marries a sack-headed alien," they sneered. Daniel ignored them, his steps firm, his jaw set. He knew their words were hollow. Inside, the story was different. Lyra learned to cook simple meals. She mended his clothes with clumsy but careful hands, and she began to hum while working, soft alien melodies that filled the empty walls with a strange beauty. Daniel found himself listening in silence, the sound warming him more than the fire ever could. One evening, when the sun had dipped behind the hills, Daniel sat outside the house, sharpening his axe. The stars began to rise, bright and countless. Lyra stepped out, her silver hair catching the faint light. Her glowing markings shimmered faintly. She sat beside him, holding a small bowl of soup. Her voice was soft. "Eat before it grows cold." Daniel accepted the bowl, smiling. For a while they sat in silence, staring at the endless sky. The stars stretched forever, each one a fire in the dark. Lyra spoke suddenly, her voice trembling. "Daniel, do you regret me?" Daniel turned quickly. "What?" She lowered her eyes, her hands tightening around the blanket on her shoulders. "You had a life, even if it was lonely. But now, trouble follows you. People hate me. They hate you for keeping me." Daniel set the bowl aside and reached for her hand. Her fingers were thin, her skin warm under the glow of her markings. "Lyra, listen to me," he said firmly. "I do not regret you. Not for a single moment." Her glowing eyes lifted to his, shimmering with tears. Daniel took a breath, his chest heavy with words he had never spoken aloud. "When I first saw you, I thought I was saving you. But the truth is, you saved me. You filled my house with life. You filled my heart with something I thought I lost forever." Lyra's lips parted, her tears falling. She whispered, "But I am not human. I am not like you." Daniel shook his head. "It doesn't matter. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. And I choose you." The night was still, only the whisper of wind around them. Daniel felt the weight of his words settle like stones in the earth. He had spoken from his soul, and there was no taking it back. Lyra's face glowed softly in the starlight, her lips trembling. Then she whispered, "And I choose you." Something shifted between them, not sudden but powerful, like a door opening to a new world. Daniel's heart pounded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thin silver band. It was old, worn, something he had carried for years. He had once thought it would rust away with his memories, but now it had purpose. "Lyra," he said, his voice steady despite the storm inside him. "I have nothing to give but myself. But if you accept, I want you beside me, not as a guest, not as someone I protect, but as my wife, my partner, my family." Lyra gasped, her hand covering her mouth, her eyes filled with tears glowing brighter than ever. For a moment she shook her head, whispering, "No one has ever asked me." "No one." Daniel held the ring out, the starlight reflecting on the metal. "I am asking," he said. Her hands trembled as she lowered them. She nodded slowly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Daniel. Under the endless stars." He slipped the band onto her finger. It was loose, imperfect, but it fit in the only way that mattered. Lyra leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. For a long time, neither spoke. They simply breathed, two broken souls binding themselves together in quiet promise. That night, there was no priest, no crowd, no music. The universe itself was their witness. The stars, countless and ancient, looked down as they chose each other, and in that silence, in that simple act, their wedding was complete. When they returned inside, the fire burned low. Lyra set the sack back on the hook by the wall. This time her hands lingered on it. She no longer clutched it like a shield. She turned back to Daniel, her eyes glowing brighter than the flames. "No more chains," she whispered. Daniel nodded, his voice firm. "No more chains, only us." For the first time since he had found her, Lyra smiled fully. It was small but pure, and Daniel felt something inside him heal, something that had been broken for years. He knew the road ahead would not be easy. The colony would not stop whispering. Danger would still linger. But he also knew they were no longer alone. Together they had made a choice. Under the stars, in the silence of the night, Daniel and Lyra had become more than survivor and rescuer. More than alien and human, they had become family, bound not by blood but by love and promise. Years passed, and the small house at the edge of the colony changed. The walls were patched stronger, the roof no longer leaked. Smoke rose from the chimney every evening, carrying the smell of bread and soup. Once it had been a place of silence, but now it was filled with voices, laughter, and footsteps that ran across the wooden floor. Daniel sat on the worn chair by the door. His hair, now streaked with gray, in the yard outside. Children played. Their shouts echoed in the crisp air. Some were human, some were not. But their games carried no difference. They chased each other with sticks, tumbled into the grass, and laughed until their bellies ached. Lyra stood nearby, her silver hair shimmering in the light of the setting sun. Her glowing patterns were stronger now, flowing across her skin like living rivers. Once, she had hidden them in shame, but now she wore them proudly. The children often touched them curiously, calling them stars on skin, and she would laugh softly, explaining their meaning. Daniel watched her with quiet pride. His heart swelled each time her glowing eyes met his. There had been many hard days, many cruel stares from the colony, but their bond had only grown deeper. Lyra was no longer the girl with a sack on her head, trembling in silence. She was a wife, a mother, a leader to those who had none. It began with one child, abandoned at the edge of the market. Daniel remembered the day vividly. Lyra had seen the boy first. She had run to him, her arms wrapping around his thin frame. Daniel saw the same fear in the boy's eyes that once lived in hers. They brought him home. And that night, as he ate by the fire, Lyra whispered, "Family." Daniel nodded, and the choice was made. After that, more came. Children with no parents, no homes, some human, some alien, some left by desperate families, others survivors of raids or slavery. Daniel and Lyra took them all in. Their home stretched to hold more, and though food was scarce, warmth never was. Each child carried scars, but slowly, laughter replaced silence. The colony did not understand. Some mocked them, calling their house a nest of strays. Others whispered curses, yet over time even the harshest voices softened. For while others turned children away, Daniel and Lyra never did. The village began to notice the change. The children grew strong. They smiled. They worked together. And people began to see not shame but hope. One evening, a storm raged outside, rain beating against the roof. Inside, the fire burned bright. The children gathered around Lyra, listening as she told them stories from her people. Her voice was calm and melodic. Her glowing hands traced shapes in the air, showing the stars. Daniel sat in the corner, watching their faces, wide-eyed with wonder. He felt a lump in his throat, remembering the day he first saw her, head covered, sold for 3 credits. Lyra caught his gaze and smiled softly. Her smile still carried the same warmth that had once healed his loneliness. He returned it, his heart heavy and light at the same time. Later, when the storm calmed and the children slept, Daniel and Lyra sat outside under the clearing sky. The stars stretched endlessly above. Daniel reached for her hand, their fingers fitting as if they had always been meant to. "Do you ever think," he whispered, "how far we've come?" Lyra's glowing eyes lifted to the sky. "I think of it every day," she said softly. "Once, I had no one, not even a name worth speaking. Now, we have a family." She leaned against his shoulder, her voice trembling with emotion. "You gave me more than life, Daniel. You gave me home." Daniel's throat tightened. He kissed the top of her head, whispering, "You gave me the same, Lyra." The night was still, but their home behind them breathed with warmth and life. Children stirred in their dreams, safe under the roof that had once been nothing but cold walls. Years later, when Daniel grew slower and his hair turned white, the house still rang with laughter. Lyra's glow never faded, not in her skin, not in her eyes. To the children, she was a mother of stars. To Daniel, she was the answer to every lonely night he had endured. And when people from the colony passed by, they no longer whispered in scorn. Instead, they looked with quiet respect. Some even sent their children to learn from Lyra's stories, or to eat at Daniel's table. The family they had built was no longer hidden. It had become a light others could not ignore. It had begun with 3 credits and a sack on her head, but it ended with a family that no chain could ever break. Daniel, once a lonely man, was never alone again. Lyra, once a girl sold as worthless, had become the heart of a home. Together, under the stars, they had built a family that would outlast whispers, storms, and even time.